The Fox Theater in Detroit was electric that December night in 1973, filled with the kind of energy that only happens when hometown royalty returns to perform for the people who knew them before the world did. Every seat in the ornate venue was occupied by fans who had watched Marvin Gaye grow from a young Motown hopeful into the sophisticated artist now commanding the stage with effortless authority. The golden lights cast shadows across the Art Deco architecture, and the anticipation in the air felt almost sacred, like a church service where the gospel being preached was pure soul music. Marvin was deep into his second set, riding the wave of success that had followed his groundbreaking Let's Get It On album. The crowd had already been transported through What's Going On, Mercy, Mercy Me, and Inner City Blues, each song delivered with the kind of emotional precision that reminded everyone why they called him one of the greatest voices of his generation. Now he stood center stage, microphone in hand, beginning the opening notes of the song that had started it all for him, the song that had introduced the world to his social consciousness and artistic vision. In the third row, sitting quietly among the audience members who hadn't recognized him in the dim lighting, was Stevie Wonder. At 23, Stevie was already a musical prodigy whose Inner Visions album had redefined what was possible in popular music. He had come to Detroit to visit family and decided on impulse to catch Marvin's show, purchasing a ticket like any other fan and slipping into the theater without fanfare or announcement. He sat with his harmonica resting in his lap, content to be invisible in the crowd, just another soul being moved by the extraordinary talent of a fellow Detroit son. Marvin began singing, "What's Going On?" his voice carrying the weight of every injustice he had witnessed, every question he had asked about the state of the world. The backing band locked into the groove with precision that spoke of countless hours of rehearsal and an understanding of their leader's vision. The audience swayed as one, caught up in the hypnotic rhythm and the urgent poetry of lyrics that had helped define a generation's relationship with social change. This was Marvin at his most powerful, commanding the stage with a presence that filled every corner of the historic venue. Stevie found himself deeply moved by what he was hearing. The song had always resonated with him, but experiencing it live, feeling the vibrations of Marvin's voice and the band's instruments wash over him in waves of sound, was something entirely different. Without conscious thought, he lifted his harmonica to his lips and began to play along, his instrument finding spaces in the arrangement where it could add color and texture without interfering with the established melody. The harmonica's voice was soft at first, almost inaudible beneath the fuller sound of the stage. But it was there, a gentle counterpoint that seemed to understand exactly where it belonged. The first person to notice was a woman sitting directly behind Stevie. She had been watching Marvin perform when she became aware of a sound that wasn't coming from the stage, a sweet, melodic line that seemed to be floating up from somewhere in the audience. She looked around, trying to locate the source, and her eyes settled on the young man in front of her, who was playing harmonica with his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. It took her a moment to realize who she was looking at, and when recognition dawned, she gasped audibly enough for others around her to turn and look. Word spread through the audience in ripples, whispered conversations as people began to understand that Stevie Wonder was not only in attendance, but was actually playing along with Marvin's performance. The harmonica line grew more confident as Stevie became more immersed in the music, his instrument weaving in and out of the established arrangement with the kind of intuitive musicality that had made him famous around the world. He wasn't trying to upstage anyone or draw attention to himself. He was simply responding to beautiful music in the most natural way he knew how. On stage, Marvin was initially unaware of what was happening in the audience. He was focused on his performance, on delivering the emotional truth of the song to every person in the theater. But as the harmonica became more prominent, as its sweet voice began to complement his vocal line in ways that seemed almost telepathically perfect, he started to notice. At first, he thought it might be coming from the band, perhaps a musician he hadn't seen in the wings, adding an impromptu element to the arrangement. But the sound was coming from the wrong direction, rising from somewhere in front of him rather than behind. Marvin's eyes began scanning the audience as he continued to sing, searching for the source of the beautiful harmonica playing that was making his song sound even more complete than he had imagined it could be. The crowd was beginning to buzz with excitement, pointing and turning in their seats as they tried to direct his attention to where Stevie was sitting. When Marvin's gaze finally found him, when he saw the young musical genius sitting in the third row, with his harmonica pressed to his lips and his whole being focused on the music they were creating together, his face broke into a smile of pure joy and disbelief. For a moment, Marvin forgot he was performing for 1,500 people. He forgot about the carefully planned set list and the expectations of his audience. All that mattered was the magical connection happening between two musicians who had found each other across the divide between stage and audience, creating something spontaneous and beautiful that neither of them had planned but both of them understood instinctively. He gestured towards Stevie with his free hand, a movement that was part recognition, part invitation, part celebration of the unexpected gift he was receiving. The audience, now fully aware of what was happening, began to cheer and applaud even as the song continued. They understood they were witnessing something special, a moment of pure musical communion between two artists who respected and admired each other's work. Stevie, hearing the response of the crowd and sensing Marvin's acknowledgement, opened his eyes and smiled, but he didn't stop playing. If anything, his harmonica became more expressive, finding new melodies within the framework of the song, responding to Marvin's vocal improvisations with instrumental phrases that seemed to complete thoughts the singer had only half expressed. As What's Going On reached its natural conclusion, Marvin made a decision that would create one of the most talked about moments in Detroit music history. Instead of moving on to his next planned song, he stepped back from the microphone and began applauding, his hands clapping in rhythm as he looked directly at Stevie. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily throughout the theater, "we have someone very special with us tonight, someone who just reminded me why Detroit produces the finest musicians in the world." The crowd erupted in cheers, understanding that something extraordinary was about to happen. Stevie lowered his harmonica and smiled, feeling the warmth of the audience's reaction wash over him. He had not come to the theater expecting to participate in the performance, but music had a way of creating its own opportunities, its own moments of connection that transcended the usual boundaries between performer and audience. "Mr. Stevie Wonder," Marvin continued, his voice filled with genuine affection and respect, "would you honor us by joining me up here? I think these good people would love to hear what happens when two Detroit boys get together and make some music." The invitation was unprecedented, generous, and entirely in keeping with the spirit of musical brotherhood that had always characterized the best of the Motown family. Stevie hesitated for just a moment, not from reluctance, but from a desire to make sure this was really what Marvin wanted. When he saw the encouraging nods and heard the enthusiastic cheers of the audience, he carefully made his way out of his row and toward the stage, guided by the helping hands of audience members who wanted to ensure he could navigate safely. Watching Stevie make his way to the stage, moving with the careful confidence of someone who had learned to navigate the world without sight, the audience fell into a respectful hush. There was something deeply moving about witnessing this moment of artistic generosity, this spontaneous decision by one performer to share his spotlight with another. Marvin met Stevie at the edge of the stage and helped him up, the two men embracing briefly before Marvin led him to a second microphone that had been quickly set up by the stage crew. "What do you feel like playing?" Marvin asked quietly, speaking just loud enough for Stevie to hear. The question was simple but profound, an acknowledgement that this moment belonged to both of them now, that whatever happened next would be the result of their combined inspiration rather than any predetermined plan. Stevie smiled and lifted his harmonica. "How about we let the music decide?" he replied, and without further discussion, he began to play the opening notes of "You Are the Sunshine of My Life," his own composition that had become one of the most beloved songs of the decade. The melody flowed from his harmonica with liquid sweetness, each note perfectly placed, each phrase building on the last to create something that felt both familiar and completely fresh. Marvin listened for a moment, letting the melody sink into his consciousness, and then began to sing, his voice wrapping around Stevie's harmonica line like they had rehearsed this collaboration for months. The chemistry between them was immediate and undeniable. Two masters of their craft finding common ground in the universal language of music. The backing band, professional musicians who had learned to adapt to unexpected situations, quickly found their place in the impromptu arrangement, providing a rhythmic foundation that supported both performers without overwhelming either one. The audience was transfixed, understanding that they were witnessing something that could not be planned, purchased, or repeated. This was live music at its most essential. Two artists creating beauty together in real time, responding to each other's musical choices with the kind of telepathic understanding that only happens when talent meets inspiration. Stevie's harmonica danced around Marvin's vocal lines, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes providing counterpoint, always serving the song while showcasing the extraordinary musicality that had made him famous around the world. As the song progressed, both men began to relax into the collaboration, their initial careful respect for each other's space giving way to a more playful musical conversation. Marvin began to improvise vocal riffs that left spaces for Stevie to fill with harmonica flourishes. Stevie responded with melodic phrases that seemed to ask questions, which Marvin answered with vocal lines that completed the musical thoughts. The audience could feel the joy radiating from the stage, the pure pleasure these two artists were taking in making music together. When "You Are the Sunshine of My Life" concluded, the applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the historic theater's foundations. But neither Marvin nor Stevie seemed ready to end their collaboration. There was an energy between them now, a musical momentum that demanded to be followed wherever it might lead. "You know," Marvin said, speaking into his microphone but looking at Stevie, "I've always wondered what my girl would sound like with some harmonica on it." The reference to the Temptations' classic hit drew cheers from the audience, who recognized the song as one of the most perfect pieces of music ever to emerge from the Motown catalog. Stevie grinned and nodded, and without any further discussion, he began to play the song's iconic opening melody on his harmonica, the notes floating through the theater with crystalline clarity. Marvin joined in vocally, but instead of simply covering the familiar arrangement, he began to interpret the song in his own style, making it more personal, more intimate, transforming it from a group performance into something that felt like a conversation between old friends. The magic continued for another 20 minutes, the two musicians exploring songs from both of their catalogs and finding new ways to present familiar material. They performed Superstition, with Marvin providing vocal percussion, while Stevie's harmonica handled the main melody. They reimagined Let's Get It On as a gentle ballad, with Stevie's instrument adding a sweetness that complemented the song's sensual message. Each performance was different from anything either artist had done before, proof of what could happen when creative minds were allowed to explore without limitation or expectation. Throughout it all, the audience remained completely engaged, understanding that they were witnessing musical history being made. These were not just two famous performers sharing a stage. This was a demonstration of music's power to create instant connections, to build bridges between artists and audiences, to transform ordinary nights into extraordinary memories. The Fox Theater had hosted countless performances over its long history, but few had captured the essence of Detroit's musical spirit as completely as this impromptu collaboration between two of the city's finest sons. As the evening progressed toward its natural conclusion, both men seemed reluctant to let the moment end. But all performances must eventually conclude, and Marvin finally stepped forward to address the audience one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction and gratitude, "this has been one of the most special nights of my career. To be able to share the stage with someone as talented and generous as Stevie Wonder, here in our hometown, in front of all of you beautiful people, this is what music is all about." He turned to Stevie, who was still holding his harmonica, still smiling with the joy of having participated in something magical and unrepeatable. "Thank you, my friend," Marvin continued, "for reminding me why we do what we do and for showing everyone here what happens when musicians trust each other enough to create without fear." Stevie stepped forward to his microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the theater as he responded, "Marvin, the pleasure has been all mine. This is what Detroit music is about. This is what Motown taught us, that music is meant to be shared, meant to bring people together. Thank you for letting me be part of your evening. and thank you all for making me feel so welcome. The final applause seemed to last forever, wave after wave of appreciation from an audience that knew they would be talking about this night for the rest of their lives. As the two performers embraced one final time before leaving the stage, there was a sense of completion, of having witnessed something that perfectly captured the spirit of collaboration and mutual respect that had made Detroit's music scene legendary around the world. Years later, both men would speak fondly of that December night at the Fox Theater, remembering it as an example of what could happen when ego was set aside in service of the music itself. In interviews, Marvin would describe it as one of his favorite performance experiences, a reminder of music's power to create unexpected moments of beauty and connection. Stevie would recall it as an evening when the audience became part of the performance, when the traditional boundaries between entertainer and entertained dissolved in service of something larger and more meaningful. The Fox Theater still stands in Detroit, still hosts performances by world-class artists, still provides a venue where music can work its magic on audiences hungry for authentic artistic expression. But those who were present that December night in 1973 know that they witnessed something special, a spontaneous collaboration that demonstrated the best of what live performance could offer when talented artists chose generosity over ego, connection over competition,